On Father's Day, my children called me to cancel dinner. We have more important things to do than waste our money on a dying old man. I simply hung up and cried. The next day, they saw my name on TV, $117 million in the lottery. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I'm David Mitchell, and at 59 years old, I thought I had learned to expect disappointment. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on Father's Day, 3 years after Margaret's death. The morning started with hope, which should have been my first warning. I woke up early, around 6:30, and immediately began planning the dinner I had been looking forward to for weeks. Margaret always said I was too optimistic about our children, that I gave them too much credit. Standing in my empty kitchen that Sunday morning, I realized she had been right all along. I had spent most of Saturday at the grocery store carefully selecting ingredients for Jennifer's favorite lasagna, Marcus's beloved garlic bread, and Sarah's treasured chocolate cake. The total came to $87.43, which was more than I usually spend on groceries in 2 weeks. My monthly Social Security check of $1,200 doesn't stretch far, but I convinced myself this was worth it. When was the last time all my children had been under the same roof? The dining room table, the same oak table Margaret and I had bought when Jennifer was born 32 years ago, looked beautiful. I had polished it until it gleamed, set out our good china, the wedding set Margaret's mother had given us, and even bought fresh flowers from the farmer's market, white roses, Margaret's favorite. The whole house smelled like the lavender cleaner I had used to scrub every surface. By 2 o'clock, everything was ready. The lasagna was in the oven, the bread was warming, and the cake sat perfectly frosted on the counter. I had even showered and put on the blue shirt Jennifer had given me last Christmas, the one she said brought out my eyes. I kept checking my phone, expecting confirmation texts about arrival times. None came. The first call came at 3:15. Jennifer's name flashed on my screen, and my heart jumped with relief. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you running late? Traffic on Highway 10 can be terrible on Sundays. Dad, about tonight." Her voice was different, colder than usual. "I'm not coming." I felt my stomach drop, but I tried to stay positive. "Oh, are you feeling sick? We can reschedule for next weekend." "No, Dad, I'm not sick. Brad and I talked about it, and we decided we have better things to do with our Sunday than drive an hour to eat dinner with you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down heavily in Margaret's old rocking chair, the phone pressed against my ear. "Jennifer, honey, it's Father's Day. I've been cooking all morning. Dad, you need to understand something. Brad and I are saving for a house. We can't keep wasting money on gas and bringing gifts every time you want to play Happy Family. You're retired. You have all the time in the world. We have responsibilities." I tried to find words, but they wouldn't come. In the background, I could hear Brad laughing at something on television. My daughter was choosing a TV show over her father. "Besides," Jennifer continued, "you'll probably be fine on your own. You always are." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, hoping I had misunderstood, that she would call back and say it was a joke. She didn't. 20 minutes later, Marcus called. My heart lifted again, foolishly hoping at least one of my children would show up. "Hey, Dad, quick question. Did you really think we were all coming today?" "Marcus, yes, we planned this 2 weeks ago. Remember? You said you'd bring Sandra and the baby." He laughed, but it wasn't a warm sound. "Dad, Sandra and I decided we're not doing family obligations anymore. It's too stressful, and honestly, too expensive. Do you know how much it costs to drive to your place and back? Plus, Sandra made plans with her mother, and her family actually helps us out financially." Ora! The comparison stung worse than Jennifer's rejection. Sandra's family had money, real money. They had bought Marcus and Sandra their car, helped with their apartment deposit, even paid for their wedding. I had contributed what I could, $700 from my savings, but it wasn't enough to matter. "Marcus, I'm your father. Doesn't that count for something?" "Dad, be realistic. What do you actually bring to our lives? You don't babysit. You don't help with money. You just want us to visit and listen to the same stories about Mom over and over. We're trying to build a future here." I closed my eyes, feeling 3 years of grief and loneliness crash over me like a wave. I just wanted to spend time with my children. Look, I don't mean to be harsh, but we have our own lives now. You had your time with us when we were kids. Now it's our turn to focus on what matters." He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in Margaret's chair for a long time, staring at the perfectly set table. The lasagna timer went off, but I didn't move. The smell of burning cheese began to fill the kitchen, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Sarah called at 4:45. She was my youngest, my baby girl, the one who used to crawl into bed with Margaret and me during thunderstorms. Surely she would come. "Daddy?" Her voice sounded strained, like she had been crying. "Sarah, sweetheart, are you okay?" "Daddy, I can't come today. Tom and I had a huge fight about money again, and I just can't pretend to be happy right now." At least she sounded sorry, unlike her siblings. "Sarah, honey, you don't have to pretend anything. Come over, we'll talk. I'll make you some tea." "No, Daddy, you don't understand. Tom is furious that I was even planning to spend money on gas to visit you. He said we can't keep throwing money away on a sad old man who doesn't contribute anything to our lives." The words felt like a slap. "Sarah, those are Tom's words, not yours." "But he's not wrong, is he?" Her voice broke. "Daddy, I love you, but what do you actually do for us? You can't help with money. You can't babysit because you don't drive at night anymore. You can't even help us with advice because your world is so different from ours." I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "Sarah, I raised you. I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I drove you to every soccer practice, every dance recital. And I'm grateful for that, I really am. But that was then, Daddy. This is now. Tom says we need to focus on people who can actually help us build our future, not drag us backward into the past." "Is that what I am to you?" "The past?" She was crying now, but she didn't deny it. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I just can't deal with this today. Tom is already angry enough." The line went dead. I sat in the growing darkness, listening to the smoke detector beep as the lasagna burned in the oven. The beautiful table setting looked like a mockery now, plates waiting for guests who would never come. The white roses were already starting to wilt in the heat. I thought about Margaret, about how she used to worry that we were giving the children too much, making life too easy for them. "They need to struggle a little, David," she would say. "How else will they learn to appreciate what they have?" I had disagreed then. I wanted to give them everything, to shield them from every hardship I had faced growing up poor. I worked overtime for years, missed family dinners to pay for their sports equipment, their college tuition, their wedding gifts. Margaret died before she could see how right she had been. Finally, I stood up and turned off the smoke detector. I pulled the ruined lasagna from the oven and scraped it into the garbage. The smell of burned food would linger in the house for days, a reminder of my foolish hope. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a peanut butter sandwich and a glass of milk. The silence was deafening. For the first time since Margaret's funeral, I cried until I had no tears left. I fell asleep in her rocking chair, still wearing the blue shirt Jennifer had given me, wondering where I had gone so wrong as a father. The morning after Father's Day found me sitting in my kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I hadn't slept well in Margaret's chair, and my back ached with a deep, persistent pain that seemed to match the hollow feeling in my chest. The house still smelled faintly of burned lasagna, a bitter reminder of my children's rejection. I kept replaying their words in my mind, searching for some explanation that didn't involve accepting that I had failed as a father. Jennifer's coldness, Marcus's dismissal, Sarah's tears, as she essentially told me I was worthless to her new life. Each conversation had stripped away another layer of the identity I had built over 32 years of parenthood. Around 10 in the morning, I forced myself to get dressed. The blue shirt from Jennifer lay crumpled on the floor where I had thrown it before collapsing into bed. Looking at it made my stomach turn, so I pulled on an old gray sweater instead, one of the few things Margaret had knitted for me that I could still bear to wear. I needed to get out of the house. The silence was suffocating, and everywhere I looked were reminders of the family dinners that would never happen again. The dining room table was still set, with the good china. I couldn't bring myself to clear it yet. I decided to drive to the Goodwill Donation Center. Margaret had always been good about regularly donating clothes and household items we no longer needed, but since her death, things had accumulated. closets full of her clothes that I couldn't bear to touch, boxes of children's toys from when the grandchildren used to visit, back when they were small enough to be excited about spending time with Grandpa. The drive to Goodwill took me through the old neighborhood where we had raised the children. I passed Jennifer's old elementary school, the park where I had taught Marcus to ride a bike, the dance studio where Sarah had taken lessons for 8 years. Each landmark was like a knife twist, reminding me of a time when my children actually wanted me in their lives. At Goodwill, I loaded box after box onto a cart. Margaret's winter coats, still smelling faintly of her perfume. A collection of children's books I had hoped to read to grandchildren who were now too old to visit. Christmas decorations that would never again brighten a house full of family laughter. The woman at the donation desk was kind, helping me unload everything with a gentle efficiency that suggested she had seen plenty of widowers clearing out their lives. She didn't ask questions, didn't comment on the tears I was trying to hide. She simply handed me a receipt and wished me a good day. I was walking back to my car when I remembered the winter coat I was wearing. It was one of my oldest, a brown wool coat Margaret had bought me for Christmas maybe 15 years ago. The pockets were deep, and over the years they had become repositories for forgotten items. Ticket stubs from movies we had seen, old shopping lists in Margaret's handwriting, loose change that had accumulated over months. I was about to drive away when I felt something crinkle in the left pocket. I reached in and pulled out what looked like a lottery ticket, but it was old, the edges worn soft with age. The numbers were barely visible, and the date stamp showed it was from 3 months ago, just a week before Margaret died. My hand started to shake as I looked at it. I remembered that day clearly now. Margaret had been having a good day, one of the few near the end when the pain medication didn't make her too foggy to talk. She had asked me to stop at the corner store on my way home from the hospital to buy her magazines and candy, little comforts that made the long days bearable. "Get yourself a lottery ticket too," she had said, smiling weakly from her hospital bed. "Maybe we'll get lucky and I'll live to see you rich." I had laughed it off the way you do when someone you love is dying and you're grasping for any reason to hope. I bought the ticket out of love, not belief, and tucked it into my coat pocket and forgot about it. 2 days later, Margaret slipped into a coma. A week after that, she was gone. Now, sitting in the Goodwill parking lot 3 months later, I held that forgotten piece of paper and felt a strange connection to her. It was like finding a letter she had written me, a small piece of hope she had planted in my life that I was only now discovering. I almost threw it away. What were the chances that a 3-month-old lottery ticket could be worth anything? But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of Margaret's smile when she suggested it, or maybe it was just the desperate need to feel connected to her again, even through something as silly as an old lottery ticket. I pulled out my phone and looked up the state lottery website. Finding the winning numbers for draws from 3 months ago took several minutes of navigating through archived results. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. Finally, I found the drawing date that matched my ticket. The winning numbers appeared on my screen: 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and the Powerball number 9. I looked down at my ticket, squinting at the faded numbers. 7. My birthday was the 7th of July. 14. Margaret's birthday, February 14th. Valentine's Day. 23. The date we got married, September 23rd. 31. The day Jennifer was born, October 31st. 42. The address of our first apartment on Maple Street. And 9. The number of years we tried to have children before Jennifer finally came. Every number on that ticket represented something meaningful in our life together. Margaret had chosen them. I realized this wasn't random. She had deliberately picked numbers that told the story of our love. My vision blurred as I compared the numbers again. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, 9. They matched perfectly. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring at that piece of paper. Cars came and went around me, people loading and unloading donations, going about their normal Monday routines while my world tilted on its axis. Margaret had bought me a winning lottery ticket a week before she died. She had given me hope in the form of numbers that represented our entire life together, and I had carried it around in my coat pocket for 3 months without knowing. I started laughing, but it quickly turned to sobbing. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. I laughed and cried simultaneously, thinking about Margaret's sense of humor, her belief in small miracles, her ability to surprise me even after 41 years of marriage. When I finally composed myself enough to drive, I went straight to the lottery office. I needed to verify this to make sure I wasn't imagining things in my grief-addled state. The woman behind the counter was patient as I explained about the old ticket, about my late wife, about needing to check if it was really a winner. She ran the ticket through her machine, and her expression changed immediately. She called over her supervisor, then another person, then someone who looked like a manager. They whispered among themselves, checking and rechecking, before finally turning back to me with expressions of amazement. "Sir," the manager said carefully, "this ticket is a winner for the $117 million jackpot from 3 months ago. It was never claimed." I almost fainted. $117 million. The words didn't seem real, didn't connect to anything in my experience. I was a retired factory worker who had never made more than $45,000 in a single year. This amount of money was beyond my comprehension. But more than the money, what struck me was the timing. Margaret had given me this gift just days before she died, hidden it in my coat like a secret message from beyond. At my lowest point, when my children had abandoned me and I felt completely alone in the world, she had reached out from wherever she was and reminded me that I was loved. The lottery officials explained the claiming process, the taxes, the publicity requirements. I barely heard them. All I could think about was Margaret's smile, her whispered suggestion to buy a ticket, her absolute faith that somehow everything would work out. I drove home in a daze, the validated ticket tucked safely in my wallet. My house looked different somehow, smaller and shabbier, but also filled with new possibilities. I sat at the kitchen table where I had eaten my lonely peanut butter sandwich the night before, and I started planning. My children thought I was worthless, a burden, someone who contributed nothing to their lives. They would learn soon enough how wrong they were. But first, I needed to decide what kind of man I wanted to be with this unexpected gift from the woman who had loved me unconditionally for 41 years. Margaret had always said everything happens for a reason. As I sat in our quiet kitchen, holding the ticket that would change everything, I finally understood what she meant. For 3 days after claiming my ticket, I didn't tell anyone about the money. I went through the motions of my normal routine, drinking coffee at the kitchen table, watching the morning news, watering Margaret's rose garden that I had somehow managed to keep alive despite my grief. But everything felt different, like I was living in a dream where the ordinary world had been replaced by something surreal and impossible. $117 million. Even after taxes, the lawyers explained, I would walk away with roughly $68 million. Numbers that big don't feel real when you've spent your entire life counting pennies. I kept checking my bank account online, waiting for the first installment to appear, half convinced the whole thing was an elaborate mistake. The money wasn't just life-changing, it was world-altering. But what struck me most during those quiet days was how alone I was with this incredible news. In 41 years of marriage, I had never made a major decision without Margaret. Every job change, every major purchase, every important moment in our lives had been shared, discussed, planned together over coffee at this same kitchen table. Now I sat alone with the biggest news of my life, and the only person I wanted to tell was buried in Riverside Cemetery under a headstone that read, "Beloved wife and mother." I found myself talking to her anyway, whispering updates about the lottery officials, the lawyers, the financial advisors who suddenly wanted to be my best friend. "What would you do, Margaret?" I asked her photo on the mantel. "How do we handle this?" Her smile gazed back at me, forever frozen at age 54, 2 years younger than I was now. She looked so young in that picture, taken during our last good vacation together before the cancer diagnosis. We had gone to the Grand Canyon, something we had always talked about but never made time for. Standing at the rim, looking out over that vast expanse, Margaret had turned to me and said, Promise me we won't wait for someday anymore, David. Promise me we'll live while we can. I had promised, but someday came anyway. Cancer doesn't care about your plans or your promises. It takes what it wants and leaves you holding memories and regrets in equal measure. But maybe this lottery win was Margaret's way of keeping her promise for both of us. Maybe she was giving me a chance to finally live, to stop just existing in the shadow of loss and disappointment. On Thursday morning, I drove to the bank to meet with a financial advisor about setting up accounts for the money. The drive took me past Marcus's apartment complex, and I slowed down involuntarily, looking for his car in the parking lot. It was there, a blue Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper that he couldn't afford to fix. I thought about stopping, about knocking on his door and sharing this incredible news. For a moment, I imagined his face lighting up, imagined him hugging me and apologizing for his cruel words on Father's Day. I could help him buy a house, start a college fund for the baby, give him everything he had ever wanted. But then I remembered his voice on the phone, cold and dismissive. What do you actually bring to our lives? The words still stung. 3 days later. If I showed up now with money, would his affection be real or just another transaction? I drove past without stopping. The bank meeting was surreal. 3 officials who had never given me the time of day suddenly treated me like royalty. Coffee was offered, chairs were pulled out, paperwork was expedited with smiles and excessive politeness. It was the first taste of how differently the world would treat me now, and it left me feeling uncomfortable and oddly hollow. Mr. Mitchell, the senior advisor said, with assets of this magnitude, you'll want to consider diversified investments, charitable foundations, estate planning. Have you thought about how you'd like to structure your legacy? Legacy. The word stuck with me as I drove home. What legacy was I leaving? 3 children who considered me a burden, grandchildren who barely knew my name, a house full of memories that no one else would treasure when I was gone. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Margaret's funeral. I opened a bottle of the good wine we had been saving for a special occasion. It was a Cabernet from 1998, the year Sarah graduated high school. We had talked about opening it when she got married, but by then she was too busy with Tom's family to include us in the celebration planning. I poured myself a glass and sat in Margaret's chair, thinking about the conversation with the financial advisor. He had mentioned charitable foundations, and something about that idea felt right. Margaret had always been generous with what little we had, donating to the food bank every Christmas, volunteering at the hospital gift shop, bringing casseroles to neighbors who were going through hard times. Help people, David, she used to say. That's what money is for, not to hoard, but to help. I pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Children's hospital, food banks, scholarships for kids whose parents couldn't afford college, housing assistance for elderly people living on fixed incomes. The list grew longer as I wrote, and for the first time since winning, I felt excited rather than overwhelmed. Margaret had given me this money for a reason, not to buy my children's love, not to live lavishly, but to make a difference in the world, to help people the way she always had, just on a much larger scale. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped despite everything. Maybe she was calling to apologize, to check on me after the horrible things she had said on Father's Day. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, trying to keep the hope out of my voice. "Dad, I need to ask you something." Her tone was businesslike, not apologetic. Brad's mother saw something weird on Facebook. Someone posted that a lottery winner from our area hasn't been identified yet, and it's a huge jackpot. Do you know anything about that? My blood ran cold. How had word gotten out so quickly? The lottery officials had assured me they would keep my identity private until I was ready to go public. Why would I know anything about that, Jennifer? I don't know, it's just the timing is weird. The ticket was sold at Morrison's corner store, and that's where you always buy your groceries. Plus, the winner was supposed to claim it this week. And you've been acting strange. I had been acting strange? This from the daughter who had called me a waste of money 3 days earlier. Jennifer, what exactly are you asking me? There was a pause, then her voice changed, became softer, more manipulative. Daddy, If something good happened to you, you'd tell us, right? We're family. We should share good news together. The word family coming from her lips made me angry in a way I hadn't expected. Where was this family loyalty on Father's Day when she couldn't be bothered to drive an hour to see me? Jennifer, I have to go. I'm tired. Dad, wait. If you did win something, even something small, Brad and I could really use help with the house down payment. We've been struggling, and I know you'd want to help your children succeed. There it was. Not an apology, not concern for my well-being, just another request for money. The same daughter who had told me I contributed nothing to her life was now hinting that I should contribute financially. Good night, Jennifer. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with rage and disappointment. She hadn't called to check on me or apologize for her cruelty. She had called because she smelled money. 20 minutes later, Marcus called. Then, Sarah. Both conversations followed the same pattern. Awkward small talk, casual questions about lottery tickets and local winners, then not-so-subtle hints about their financial struggles and how much they could use a windfall. None of them apologized. None of them acknowledged how they had treated me. They just wanted to know if their worthless old father had suddenly become useful to them. That night, I made a decision that would have been impossible just a week earlier. I pulled out the legal pad where I had been making charitable donation notes, and I added a new category at the top, children's inheritance. Under it, I wrote a single number, 0. Margaret had always said that money reveals people's true character. My children had revealed theirs on Father's Day when they thought I had nothing to offer them. Now that they suspected I might have something valuable, their true nature was showing again. They had made their choice. Now I would make mine. I spent the rest of the evening researching charitable organizations, reading about their missions and impact. By midnight, I had a preliminary plan that would donate 80% of my winnings to causes Margaret would have supported. The remaining 20% would be enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life, to travel and experience the things Margaret and I had always planned to do together. As I prepared for bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. For the first time since Margaret's death, I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. She had given me the means to make a difference, and I wouldn't waste it on children who only loved me when they needed something. The phone rang twice more before I turned it off. I didn't need to answer to know who it was or what they wanted. My children had shown me their hearts, and I had finally learned to see them clearly. Tomorrow, I would start building the legacy Margaret and I should have created together, and my ungrateful children wouldn't be part of it. The news broke on Friday morning. Despite the lottery office's promises of privacy, somehow a local reporter had gotten wind of my identity. I woke up to find a van parked across the street from my house, and by the time I had my first cup of coffee, my phone was ringing constantly. The story was simple but devastating to my children's narrative. Local widower wins $117 million jackpot. The article mentioned my address, my age, and the fact that I was a retired factory worker living alone since my wife's death 3 years ago. What it didn't mention was how my own children had abandoned me just days before this windfall. My phone showed 52 missed calls by 10 in the morning. 52. I scrolled through the call log, watching my children's names appear over and over like a desperate drumbeat. Jennifer had called 17 times, Marcus 15 times, Sarah 20 times. The pattern was clear and pathetic. I turned off my phone and watched through the front window as more news vans arrived. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly found reasons to walk past my house, craning their necks for a glimpse of the lottery winner. Mrs. Patterson from next door actually had the audacity to ring my doorbell with a casserole, as if food would somehow give her access to my story. Around noon, Jennifer's car pulled into my driveway. She got out slowly, checking her appearance in the side mirror, before walking to my front door. Through the window, I could see her practicing her expression, arranging her features into what she probably thought looked like concerned daughter rather than opportunistic vulture. Her knock was soft, tentative. "Daddy, it's me. I brought lunch." I sat in Margaret's chair and didn't answer, Let her stand there. Let her experience what rejection felt like. Daddy, I know you're in there. Your car is in the garage. Please, I just want to make sure you're okay with all these reporters around. The concern in her voice was so fake, it made my stomach turn. Where was this worry about my well-being on Father's Day when she was too busy to visit her lonely, widowed father? She knocked again, harder this time. Dad, come on. This is crazy, hiding from your own daughter. We need to talk about this lottery thing. You probably need help managing everything. Help managing everything. There it was. Not congratulations, not joy for my good fortune, but immediately jumping to how she could insert herself into my financial affairs. I watched through the curtain as she pulled out her phone and started calling. My silent phone lit up on the coffee table next to me. When I didn't answer, she hung up and immediately tried again. Then again. The desperation was almost comical. Finally, she gave up and got back in her car, but instead of leaving, she sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, making phone calls. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her gesturing wildly, clearly strategizing with someone about how to get to me. An hour later, Marcus arrived. He didn't bother with the pretense of concern. He marched up to my door and pounded on it like a debt collector. Dad, open up. We know you're in there, and we know about the money. You can't just ignore your family. Family. The word had lost all meaning coming from him. He had made it clear on Father's Day that I wasn't really part of his family anymore, that his wife's parents were more valuable because they could contribute financially to his life. Dad, this is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. Just open the door so we can talk like adults. I almost laughed at that. When had Marcus ever wanted to talk to me like an adult? Our last real conversation had been him dismissing me as irrelevant to his future, someone whose time had passed. He kept pounding for another 5 minutes before giving up, but like Jennifer, he didn't leave. He sat in his car, making phone calls and waiting, watching my house like it was under surveillance. By evening, all 3 of my children were camped outside my house. Jennifer had brought Brad, who kept walking around my property looking for another way in. Marcus had Sandra and the baby, using my grandchild as emotional ammunition. Sarah had come with Tom, and I could see them arguing in their car about something. The circus was complete when Margaret's sister Patricia arrived around 7. I hadn't spoken to Patricia since the funeral, where she had made it clear she thought I was too old and depressed to be good company for anyone. But now she was knocking on my door with the same fake concern as my children. David, honey, it's Patricia. The kids called me. They're worried about you. Worried about me, or worried about their access to my money? I had a pretty good idea which one it was. My phone, which I had turned back on to monitor the situation, was buzzing constantly with messages. I scrolled through them, each one more desperate and transparent than the last. From Jennifer, Dad, we need to stick together as a family now, more than ever. Money can tear families apart if we're not careful. From Marcus, Dad, I'm sorry if I was harsh on Father's Day. I was stressed about work. Can we please talk? From Sarah, Daddy, I love you so much. I'm scared these reporters are going to take advantage of you. Please, let us help protect you. The apologies were hollow, arriving only after they discovered I had something they wanted. Not one of them had reached out in the 3 days between Father's Day and the news breaking. Their love was conditional on my net worth, and they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Around 8 o'clock, Brad made the mistake that revealed their true intentions. I watched through the window as he walked around to my back door and started trying to force it open. When that didn't work, he checked the windows, looking for an unlocked one. He was literally trying to break into my house. That's when I called the police. Yes, I'd like to report someone attempting to break into my home, I told the dispatcher calmly. He's trying my back door and windows. Is this person unknown to you, sir? No, it's my son-in-law, but he doesn't live here, and I haven't given him permission to enter my property. The police arrived within 10 minutes, and I watched with grim satisfaction as they questioned Brad about his activities. The conversation was heated, with Jennifer jumping out of her car to defend him, claiming it was a family misunderstanding. So, sir, one of the officers said to me when I finally answered the door, your daughter says there's been a misunderstanding. She says they're just concerned about you after the lottery win. Officer, 3 days ago, these same people told me I was worthless and contributed nothing to their lives. They refused to visit me on Father's Day, calling me a burden and a waste of their time and money. Now that they know I've won the lottery, suddenly they're concerned about my welfare. What do you think that tells us about their true motivations? The officer's expression changed as he processed this information. Do you want them removed from your property, sir? Yes, I do. All of them. It took another hour to clear everyone out. My children were furious, shouting about family loyalty and how ungrateful I was being. Patricia accused me of being senile and suggested I needed a competency evaluation. The neighbors watched the whole spectacle from their yards, and I knew the story would be all over town by morning. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I had taken control of my own life. I had set boundaries and enforced them, something Margaret had always encouraged me to do with the children, but I had been too soft-hearted to follow through. That night, alone in my quiet house, I opened a second bottle of wine and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. The charitable foundation was taking shape in my mind, and I started sketching out the details. The Margaret Mitchell Foundation, for forgotten seniors maybe, or the Loving Memory Foundation. Something that would honor her while helping people who found themselves in situations like mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Daddy, I'm scared. Tom is furious about the money and he's saying things about what we deserve as your children. Please, call me." I stared at the message for a long time. Sarah had always been the most manipulative of my children, using tears and emotional appeals to get what she wanted. But this message revealed something darker. Tom was saying things about what we deserve, not what they hoped for, not what they would appreciate, but what they deserved from me. I deleted the message without responding. Around midnight, I made a final decision about my will. Not only would my children receive nothing, but I would establish legal barriers to prevent them from contesting the will after my death. Margaret had left me this money to help people, and I wouldn't let our selfish children turn it into a legal battle that would consume resources meant for charity. As I prepared for bed, I felt lighter than I had in years. The siege outside my house had revealed everything I needed to know about my children's character. They had shown me exactly who they were when they thought I had nothing, and exactly who they were when they discovered I had everything. Margaret had always said people show you their true selves eventually. You just have to be willing to see it. Now I saw my children clearly, perhaps for the first time, and I was finally ready to move forward without them. Tomorrow I would start building something beautiful from the ashes of my shattered family. Something that would make Margaret proud and help people who deserved it, more than my ungrateful children ever would. The week following the police incident brought a temporary quiet to my life, but I knew it wouldn't last. My children had tasted the possibility of wealth, and like addicts, they wouldn't give up easily. Sure enough, by the following Monday, they had regrouped and developed a new strategy. This time, they came bearing gifts of reconciliation. Jennifer arrived first, carrying a beautiful flower arrangement and wearing the kind of dress she usually reserved for job interviews. Her smile was practiced, her voice honey-sweet as she apologized through my front door. "Daddy, I brought you flowers, white roses just like the ones Mom loved. I feel terrible about the misunderstanding last week. Brad and I have been talking, and we realize we may have come across as pushy. We just love you so much and want to be part of this exciting time in your life." I watched her through the window as she arranged her features into what she probably thought looked like sincere remorse. The flowers were expensive, probably cost her $50 she couldn't afford. Money she had claimed just a week ago she couldn't waste on visiting her father. "Daddy, I know you can hear me. Please, let's start over. I want to plan a celebration dinner for you. The whole family together, toasting your good fortune. Doesn't that sound wonderful?" It might have sounded wonderful if I hadn't heard her real voice just 10 days earlier, dismissing me as worthless and irrelevant to her life. Now she wanted to celebrate my good fortune, not because she was happy for me, but because she wanted a piece of it. When I didn't respond, she left the flowers on my doorstep and drove away. But she was back 2 hours later with Marcus and Sarah in tow. This time they had brought my grandson, little Tommy, who was barely 2 years old, and had no idea he was being used as emotional blackmail. "Grandpa," Marcus called through the door, "Tommy's here. He's been asking about you. He learned a new word he wants to show you." I could hear Tommy babbling in the background, probably confused about why they were standing outside instead of going into Grandpa's house like they used to. The manipulation was so transparent, it made me sick. They had never brought Tommy to visit before, not once since Margaret's funeral. Now suddenly, my grandson was asking about me. "Dad, please," Sarah's voice joined in. "We know we hurt your feelings on Father's Day. We were all going through tough times and we took it out on you. That wasn't fair. We want to make it right." Tough times. As if their financial stress justified the cruelty they had shown me. As if being busy or worried gave them permission to treat me like a burden they couldn't wait to discard. They kept this up for an hour, taking turns appealing to my emotions, using my grandson as a prop, promising family dinners and regular visits if only I would forgive them and let them back into my life. What they didn't say, but what hung in the air like smoke, was that they wanted back into my financial life too. Finally, they gave up and left. But the flowers remained on my doorstep, wilting in the afternoon sun like their fake apologies. That evening, I had dinner with my lawyer, Robert Chen, at a quiet restaurant across town. Robert had been handling my legal affairs since Margaret's death, and he was one of the few people I trusted completely. He was also the only person who knew about my charitable foundation plans. "David, I have to ask," Robert said over coffee, "are you sure about disinheriting your children completely? It's a big decision, and family dynamics can be complicated." I told him about Father's Day, about their phone calls when they discovered I might have money, about the siege of my house and Brad's attempted break-in. Robert listened without judgment, taking notes as I spoke. "I see," he said finally. "And you're certain this foundation is what you want?" "It's what Margaret would have wanted," I said firmly. "She always believed in helping people who couldn't help themselves. My children can help themselves. They just choose not to. They'd rather rely on others, whether it's Sandra's parents or me or whoever else they can manipulate." Robert nodded slowly. "In that case, I recommend we structure this very carefully. We'll establish the Margaret Mitchell Foundation with ironclad provisions that prevent any family challenges to your will. We'll also set up a trust that continues funding the foundation long after you're gone." We spent 2 hours working out the details. 80% of my lottery winnings would go to the foundation, dedicated to helping elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. There would be emergency funds for seniors who couldn't afford medical care, housing assistance for those living in poverty, and a special program providing companionship services for isolated elderly people. The remaining 20% would support me comfortably for the rest of my life. I planned to travel, to see the places Margaret and I had always talked about visiting. I wanted to learn photography, maybe write a book about our life together. I had decades of retirement ahead of me, and for the first time since her death, I was excited about the possibilities. "What about your children?" Robert asked as we finalized the paperwork. "Have you considered leaving them a small amount, perhaps with conditions attached?" I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "Robert, if I leave them anything, they'll see it as validation that they were right to treat me poorly and then come crawling back when they smelled money. They'll think their behavior worked, that they successfully manipulated me into providing for them, despite everything they said and did. And if you leave them nothing, then maybe they'll learn that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people as disposable and then expect them to take care of you when it's convenient." Robert made some final notes and promised to have everything legally documented within the week. As we parted ways in the restaurant parking lot, he shook my hand with genuine warmth. "David, I think Margaret would be proud of what you're doing. This foundation will help a lot of people who really need it." Driving home, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. Margaret and I had always talked about doing something meaningful with our lives, something beyond just working and raising children and paying bills. We had planned to volunteer more after retirement, to travel and experience the world together, to leave some kind of positive mark on the world. Cancer had stolen those dreams from us, but now Margaret had given me a second chance. Through that lottery ticket, Through her careful selection of numbers that told the story of our love, she had provided the means to fulfill the dreams we had shared. When I got home, the white roses Jennifer had left were still on my doorstep, now brown around the edges and dropping petals onto the concrete. I picked them up and carried them to the backyard, where I buried them in Margaret's rose garden. It seemed fitting somehow, these false flowers of reconciliation returning to the earth beside the roses that had grown from genuine love. That night, I called the local children's hospital and asked to speak with someone about setting up a charitable fund. The conversation lasted 2 hours as we discussed the needs of families dealing with childhood cancer, the devastating financial burden of long-term medical care, the way illness could destroy not just patients but entire families. By the time I hung up, I had committed $5 million to the hospital's family support program. It was the first concrete step in building Margaret's legacy, and it felt like the most important decision I had made since her death. My phone had been buzzing throughout the evening with more calls from my children, but I let them go to voicemail. I was done listening to their false apologies and transparent manipulation. They had shown me who they really were, and I had finally learned to believe them. Margaret used to say that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. My children had chosen not to love me when they thought I had nothing to offer them. Now I was choosing not to enable their selfishness with my unexpected wealth. It wasn't revenge, though I admit there was satisfaction in knowing they would eventually discover their inheritance was going to strangers who deserved it more than they did. It was justice, quiet and final, delivered not with anger, but with the calm certainty that I was finally doing the right thing. For the first time since Margaret's death, I fell asleep easily, untroubled by guilt or second-guessing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as my children inevitably discovered my plans, but tonight I was at peace with my choices. Margaret's roses bloomed outside my window, fed by the false flowers of my children's greed, growing strong and beautiful in the darkness. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of a small cabin overlooking Lake Tahoe, watching the sunrise paint the water gold and pink. The view was spectacular, the kind Margaret and I had always dreamed about but never thought we could afford. Now I could afford anything I wanted, but what I treasured most was the silence. No demanding phone calls, no manipulative visits, no children treating me like an ATM while pretending it was love. Just peace finally, after years of being taken for granted by the people who should have valued me most. The Margaret Mitchell Foundation had been officially launched 3 months ago with a ceremony I attended alone, by choice. The Children's Hospital had sent representatives, as had the Senior Center, the Food Bank, and the Housing Assistance Program that would benefit from the Foundation's work. Real people doing real work to help others, not like my children who had spent their adult lives figuring out how to avoid work while expecting others to support them. Dr. Sarah Williams, the pediatric oncologist who would oversee the hospital's family support program, had given a speech that brought tears to my eyes. She talked about families destroyed by medical bankruptcy, about parents who had to choose between treating their children and keeping their homes, about the ripple effects of illness that extended far beyond the patient. This foundation, she had said, will save families, not just financially, but emotionally. When parents don't have to worry about losing everything while fighting for their child's life, they can focus on what matters most, being present for their family during the hardest time they'll ever face. That's when I knew Margaret would have approved. She had always believed that love meant taking care of people when they couldn't take care of themselves. My children had never needed taking care of. They had just wanted someone else to make their lives easier while they made poor choices and blamed everyone else for the consequences. The transition hadn't been without drama. When news of the foundation became public, my children had exploded with rage and accusations. Jennifer had shown up at my house screaming about family loyalty and how I was destroying their futures out of spite. Marcus had threatened to contest the will, though Robert had assured me the legal structure made that virtually impossible. Sarah had tried the crying approach, bringing little Tommy and begging me to reconsider for the sake of my grandson. But their anger had only confirmed that I had made the right choice. Not once did any of them express pride in the charitable work the foundation would do. Not once did they acknowledge that helping sick children and abandoned elderly people might be more important than funding their comfortable lifestyles. It was all about them, what they deserved, what they had expected to inherit. Patricia, Margaret's sister, had been the most vindictive. She had actually gone to the local newspaper with a story about how I was mentally incompetent and being taken advantage of by unscrupulous lawyers. The reporter had been thorough enough to research the foundation's work and interview Dr. Williams, and the resulting article had painted Patricia as a bitter relative trying to sabotage charitable work out of personal greed. That article had been a turning point. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive of the foundation and critical of my family's attempts to interfere with it. For the first time in my life, strangers were defending me against my own relatives. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor, had stopped by to tell me how proud she was of what I was doing. "David," she had said, "Margaret would be so happy to see you helping people this way. Don't let those greedy children of yours make you feel guilty for doing the right thing." Other neighbors had echoed her sentiments. People who had barely spoken to me since Margaret's death suddenly wanted to share stories about elderly relatives who had been abandoned by their families, about the loneliness and financial struggles that came with aging in a society that discarded its older members. I realized I wasn't alone in my experience. There were thousands of elderly people dealing with ungrateful children, family members who saw them as burdens rather than people worthy of love and respect. The foundation would help those people, and that knowledge gave my life a purpose it had been missing since Margaret's death. The lake cabin had been an impulse purchase bought with cash from a man who was downsizing after his wife's death. Like me, he had grown tired of maintaining a large house full of memories for children who never visited. Unlike me, he didn't have the means to create something beautiful from his loss. "You're lucky," he had told me as we signed the papers. "You found a way to turn your pain into something positive. Most of us just have to live with it." But I didn't feel lucky, exactly. I felt grateful. Grateful to Margaret for the lottery ticket that had changed everything. Grateful for the clarity that came with seeing my children's true nature. Grateful for the opportunity to help people who actually needed and deserved help. The cabin was small, but perfect, with large windows overlooking the water and a stone fireplace where I spent evenings reading books Margaret and I had always meant to get to. I had taken up photography, something that had interested me since high school, but that I had never had time to pursue while working and raising children. My first series of photographs was of elderly people in the community, portraits that captured their dignity and wisdom instead of society's tendency to see them as invisible or irrelevant. The local gallery had agreed to display them, with proceeds going to the Foundation's Senior Companion Program. I had also started writing, partly for my own healing and partly to document the Foundation's work. The book was tentatively titled Love's True Test, and it told the story of how unexpected wealth had revealed the true character of my family while opening the door to meaningful relationships with people who valued kindness over money. One of those relationships was with Eleanor Santos, a 72-year-old woman I had met at the senior center where the Foundation sponsored a weekly lunch program. Eleanor's daughter lived in California and called twice a year, usually when she needed money. Her son lived locally but hadn't visited in over 2 years, claiming he was too busy with his own family. Eleanor and I had become close friends, bonding over our shared experience of family abandonment. She was intelligent, funny, and had a lifetime of stories that fascinated me. We went to museums together, took day trips to nearby towns, and had dinner every Tuesday at a little Italian restaurant that reminded us both of better times. "You know what I appreciate about you, David," she had said one evening over pasta. "You listen. Really listen. My own children haven't asked me a real question about my life in years. They call and immediately start talking about their problems, their needs, their complaints. You ask about my day, my thoughts, my memories. That's rare." It was rare, And it was precious. Eleanor had become the family I had always wanted, someone who cared about me as a person rather than as a source of financial support or emotional labor. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had found more genuine love and companionship in 6 months of new friendships than I had experienced with my own children in years. Real relationships, it turned out, weren't based on obligation or blood ties, but on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's well-being. My phone still rang occasionally with calls from Jennifer, Marcus, or Sarah, but I had learned to let them go to voicemail. Their messages had evolved from anger to bargaining to what seemed like genuine remorse, but I no longer trusted my ability to distinguish between their real emotions and their calculated manipulation. The foundation kept me busy and fulfilled in ways I hadn't expected. Board meetings, site visits to programs we funded, interviews with families who had been helped by our grants. Every story reinforced my conviction that this money was being used exactly as Margaret would have wanted. There was the 8-year-old girl whose cancer treatment was fully covered, allowing her parents to focus on her care instead of financial ruin. The elderly man whose prescription costs were paid through our senior assistance program, giving him dignity in his final years instead of the choice between medication and food. The lonely widow whose companion visits through our program had literally saved her life when she fell and couldn't get up. These were the people who deserved help, who had earned compassion through their circumstances rather than demanding it through manipulation and guilt. As I finished my morning coffee and prepared for another day of photography around the lake, I thought about Margaret and how different my life had become since finding her lottery ticket. She had given me more than money. She had given me clarity and purpose and the courage to finally put myself first. My children would never understand or forgive my choices, but I had made peace with that reality. They had revealed their true selves when they thought I had nothing to offer them. And I had finally learned to believe what they showed me rather than what I hoped they might become. The sun was fully up now, casting everything in warm golden light. It was going to be a beautiful day, full of possibilities and free from the toxic drama that had defined my life for too long. I was 60 years old, wealthy beyond my dreams, and finally surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. Margaret's lottery ticket had bought me more than financial security. It had purchased my freedom from a family that had never truly loved me. For the first time in years, I was genuinely happy, and that I knew was exactly what Margaret had wanted for me all along.